ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतङ्गमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। Let us offer our salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of all religions, the Supreme God Incarnate. Let us pray to Him to lead us from the unreal to the real, to lead us from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, to lead us from death to immortality. Let us offer our salutations to Lord Krishna, the world teacher, son of Vasudeva, the destroyer of Kamsa and Chanura, the supreme bliss of Devaki. Today's topic I am speaking on the universal gospel of Sri Krishna. So here Lord Krishna instructs to the whole mankind. He gives the philosophy of life and he instructs us how to behave and act in the life. There are three significant lessons from the Bhagavad Gita which Lord Krishna taught to Arjuna. First, Gita helps man to know himself, to know his real nature. That is, to know his soul, the Atman. So Atma Jnana leads a man to liberation from ignorance, bondage and sorrow. That's the only way. By knowing one's true self only, one can get rid of suffering. By no other means. Liberation from ignorance issues in supreme peace, bliss and blessedness. Atma Jnana, the knowledge of the self, is the highest knowledge, and liberation is the highest aim and end of life. The aim and end of life is to realize one's true nature. Thus, Bhagavad Gita confers both Atma Jnana and liberation upon man. So that's the first important lesson which Gita gives to us, to the whole humanity. Know thyself. Very nicely Lord Krishna has pointed out, the only way to get out of suffering, the only way to experience real joy and happiness is only by knowing one's own self. That is Atma-jnana. The second significant lesson from the Gita is it commands and inspires man to devote himself to loka sangraha. It's a very fine concept, loka sangraha. That is, to work for the well-being and peace of the society. That means to work for the well-being and peace of the humanity. That's why we find great significance in the teaching of Swami Vivekananda, Atmano mokshartham jagadhitaya cha. So in order to realize God, in order to realize our true nature, serve the humanity. Serve. Be humble in serving. Don't get proud. Don't be egoistic. I did so much things. I helped here. I helped there. See, don't show up like that. Do it with utmost humbleness. Then only it becomes service. Then only it paves the way for liberation. So, Lord Krishna very emphatically declares that one should devote oneself for the well-being of the society. And that idea Swami Vivekananda took it and broadcast it to the whole world. The whole Ramakrishna mission is just engaging in the service of humanity. Swamiji says further, just keep on doing service to the people. I take care of your liberation. Swamiji takes care of our liberation. We don't have to worry. Does this service lead me to liberation? Don't worry. Swamiji has said, I take the responsibility of giving liberation to you. And who is Swamiji? Lord Shiva himself, the master of initiation. Yatiraja. Swami Vivekananda is Yatiraja. So, in this teaching, Bhagavad Gita contributes to social harmony and well-being. The third important teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, it is relevant for all mankind, for all time to come. It is fresh forever. These teachings can be taken up any time you want to transform yourself. The moral dilemma which Arjuna faced in the battlefield is faced by all of us in our lives. Everyone's life is a battlefield. Our lives are our battlefields. Human nature and human problems are the same everywhere, whether in America or India, China or Russia, Japan. Same. And human destiny is the same for all time to come. Today, there are some people who think that religion is not necessary except for those who happen to relish it. According to them, it is enough if we are good and virtuous, kind and tolerant, good-tempered and amiable. But mere goodness and tolerance, amiability and goodwill are not going to save either the man or the world. We can't solve the manifold problems of life by mere goodness and amiability. The problems of life are too deep for that. They are rooted in a basic ignorance. This ignorance is not merely mental or intellectual, it is constitutional. It is spiritual blindness. Ignorance is called spiritual blindness. Spiritual knowledge alone can remove this ignorance. So, religion is a constitutional need of man. It alone can liberate us from ignorance and the resultant sorrows and evils of life and make our lives sweet, pure, peaceful and joyous. Bhagavad Gita is rational and scientific in its outlook. It doesn't demand unthinking faith from us. It takes its stand on the reality of spiritual experience. God or Atman is a factual content of spiritual experience, even as the physical world is the factual content of our sense knowledge. The Gita says that it is possible for us to become directly aware of the presence of the divine soul in us. If our experience of the external world through the senses is real, our spiritual experience of Atman or God is more so. The Gita is not merely a book of theories, dogmas and doctrines, nor is it merely a piece of ancient literature. It is a practical guide to the art of living. Yoga Shastra. It is Yoga Shastra which teaches us how to make our lives full, serene and happy. Our life is a thing of shreds and patches. It is chaotic and aimless. There is no order, discipline, system or beauty in our lives. All showy beauty, showy discipline. If the message of the Gita enters our life becomes wholesome and orderly and gets singleness of aim. The Gita opens up vast and profound vistas of spiritual life for a man who allows it to influence his thought and conduct. It helps us to improve both our inner life and our external conduct. Gita being a Yoga Shastra, its message is yoga. The word yoga gives the clue to the understanding of the message of the Gita. Its primary meaning is union or communion with God. Yoga means absorption of the individual consciousness into the universal consciousness. In a secondary sense, yoga means the path or the paths leading to union or communion with God. So the Gita is a Yoga Shastra also in the sense that it teaches us different ways to that union with God. This union has to be achieved through righteous action, which is called Karma Yoga, or loving meditation, which is called Bhakti Yoga, or through mystic knowledge, Jnana Yoga. Contrary to what some people hold, the Gita is neither an exclusive gospel of Karma Yoga, nor an exclusive gospel of Bhakti Yoga, nor an exclusive gospel of Jnana Yoga. It can better be called a gospel of yoga or spiritual life, in which all the three karma, bhakti and jnana have their rightful place. The Gita treats yoga or spiritual life as an organic whole involving the discipline of our will by karma yoga, discipline of our emotions by bhakti yoga, and discipline of our intellect by jnana yoga. These three disciplines can't be compartmentalized or isolated from each other. They together constitute spiritual life as a harmonious and integrated whole. To become pure is the first step to become spiritual. Spiritual life begins with the practice of karma yoga, which brings about self-purification. Our minds and hearts are full of passions and impurities like lust, greed, pride, prejudice, selfishness, jealousy, and so on. All these impurities stem from our ego. If our minds and hearts are to become pure, we have to sublimate our ego. Sublimation of the ego is not a small job. It requires incessant effort and constant practice. Practice of karma yoga weakens and ultimately effaces one's ego altogether. Then with the cultivation and practice of bhakti, one develops intense love and longing for God, a must in spiritual life. It frees our minds of attachments to worldly objects and pleasures. Also, with intense love and longing for God in our hearts, our minds easily become concentrated on God. Love develops into meditation on God. Jnana Yoga brings about enlightenment, which consists in union or communion with God or ultimate reality. Union with the ultimate reality is the final destiny of man in spiritual life. Now, what is karma yoga? In the first place, what is karma? There are some who identify karma with only rites and rituals. But the Gita gives a profound and comprehensive meaning to karma. According to Gita, karma includes all voluntary acts of man which have a moral value and significance. The Gita points out that morals are higher than rituals, though rites and rituals have their own rightful place in spiritual life. Moral purity is more important than mere ceremonial purity in spiritual life. It is very strange that there are many amongst us who are very punctilious about their rites and ceremonies, but rather careless about their morals. What exactly then does karma yoga mean? It means that we have to do all our actions, including rites and ceremonies, in a spirit of detachment with no desire for fruits. Most of our actions are prompted by worldly desires. They have worldly objects in view. We care more for the results and consequences of our actions than for their inherent rightness. Arjuna was more concerned about the consequences of war than about the rightness of war. The karma yogi cares more for what is right for him to do than for the consequences or results. He has a spiritual aim in view, while the actions of a worldly man have various worldly aims like fame, name, riches, power, position, pleasures, and so on. In view, all the actions of a karma yogi have a single aim: unfoldment of his spiritual nature. Karma yoga means doing actions with an eye for purity and spiritual evolution. Each action that is done with a spiritual aim, that is with detachment towards results, purifies our mind, elevates and exalts our soul. For a karma yogi, every action is a success because every action uplifts him, purifies him. He knows no failures, whereas for a man who does actions with worldly aims, some actions are a success and some will be failures. That's why the Gita advises to do all our actions with the single aim, spiritual elevation of our soul through self-purification. A karma yogi reaps manifold spiritual benefits. Worldly people are always devoted to the results of actions and not to actions themselves. They do actions for the sake of results and not for the sake of actions themselves. Naturally, while engaged in actions, they will be worried about the results. Hence, they will not have equanimity of mind while performing actions, whereas a karma yogi who is solely interested in actions only and detached towards the results will have nothing to worry him or to distract his mind. His whole mind is concentrated on executing the work with utmost efficiency. So he will be at peace and will have equanimity of mind. The Gita says doing actions with equanimity of mind is karma yoga. Whatever is done with a distracted mind will not become perfect. But what is done with equanimity of mind and with a collected mind will become perfect. Gita says that karma yoga is dexterity or skill in doing actions. Yogaha karmasu kaushalam. Whatever a karma yogi does becomes perfect. But dexterity does not mean merely perfection in actions. It means something more. Actions done with a desire for results bind a man, but a karma yogi does not get bound since he is not attached to the results. It is attachment to the results that binds a man and not the actions themselves. A karma yogi doesn't avoid his duties. He does them all right, but he escapes the bondage of actions since he is not attached to the results. Without avoiding performance of duties, a karma yogi escapes bondage of actions. That is his dexterity. Karma yoga is the solvent of karmas. It dissolves all our karmas. Some people would interpret karma yoga to mean duty for duty's sake. But it would be more proper if karma yoga is understood as duty for God's sake. There is an element of bhakti in karma yoga. A karma yogi always feels that he is a servant of God. Without bhakti, it is impossible to perform any action in the spirit of karma yoga. A karma yogi considers God as a doer and himself as only an instrument in the hands of God. He surrenders all actions, their agency and the results to God. For him, work is worship. So, bhakti is the essence of karma yoga. Bhakti is the essence of karma yoga. So you develop bhakti to the fullest measure by being a karma yogi. Bhakti is self-forgetting love and longing for God. The Gita says that true bhakti is always balanced by karma yoga on one side and jnana yoga on the other. That is, true bhakti is always accompanied by moral awareness on one side and detachment and discrimination on the other. If not, bhakti is apt to degenerate into mere emotionalism or sentimentalism or sensuality. A real bhakta never does anything immoral. nor does he run after the passing pleasures of the world. Bhakti is never blind. It is intelligent love of God. Just as there is an element of bhakti in karma yoga, there is an element of jnana in bhakti. See how they are all interlinked. That's amazing. A bhakta is always aware of the divine majesties, glories, beatitudes, graces and blessings of God. A bhakta always knows that God alone is worthy to be loved. Bhakti in its maturity becomes loving meditation on God. Bhakti sublimates all passions and purifies the heart. With bhakti in our hearts, self-control becomes easier. Meditation intensifies our longing for God. Continuous meditation of God ends in the vision of God. Thus, bhakti brings about communion with God. Even Shankaracharya, a great jnani, lays emphasis on the necessity of bhakti in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. While laying down the qualification for the study of the Gita, Acharya Shankara specifies bhakti as the necessary and sufficient qualification. It is an integral part of the attitude of bhakti to rely on divine grace as the determinant of all spiritual attainment, and grace is responsive to the aspirations of the devotee. Shankara makes this clear in his commentary on the verse, Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam tathaiva bhajamyaham mam atmanuvartante manushyaha partha sarvashaha. In whatever way men worship me, in the same way do I fulfill their desires. See how all the teachings are so universal and uplifting. You adore any God you want. It doesn't matter. You'll be uplifted. Because God emphatically says that all the forms are His own. Just as a person has got 2-3 names, one school or college name, one is birth name, another is house name. In house, the same person is called in a different way. One is job's name. But all these names are referring to the same person. In the same way, God has infinite names, infinite forms. So, you choose. That's the beauty. How God gives us freedom to enjoy the freedom in a proper way. Have the freedom to choose your own God. You don't have to convert your religion from one religion to another. What is needed is purity of character. If the character is not purified, whatever religion you may adopt, you will be in the same position as you were before. What is needed is moral purity. If that is there, you have any religion, doesn't matter. But pay attention towards the practice part of it and try to become pure, then you will enjoy the beauty. So here Lord Krishna assures us, don't get disheartened. Don't think if you are worshipping Christ, whether you will be realizing Him. If you are worshipping Krishna, whether you realize Him. If a person is worshipping Kali. But all these devotees are assured by Lord Krishna. Whatever form you adore, you will be uplifted. That's the universal teaching of Sri Krishna. Jnana is enlightenment. Jnana yoga means union with the ultimate reality through enlightenment. What is enlightenment? It is direct experience of God. Jnana does not mean knowledge only. It means both knowledge and being. Knowing is being. To know the divine is to become divine. To the extent to which we partake of the divine nature, we may be said to know God. According to the Gita, Jnana also includes the cultivation and practice of various virtues of head and heart which lead an aspirant to jnana. Detachment towards worldly objects and pleasures, discrimination between what is real and unreal, what is eternal and ephemeral, self-control, faith, etc., and hunger for liberation are some of these virtues. Knowledge of God or the ultimate reality is qualitatively different from knowledge of the world. Knowledge of God is direct and immediate. God reveals himself to us in our innermost being, whereas knowledge of the external world is indirect and mediate. We get knowledge of the objects of the world indirectly through the senses and the mind. There is a distance between us and the world, but there is no distance between us and God. When we experience God, we know him directly without the medium of the senses and the mind. He reveals himself directly to our consciousness. We become one with him. Our consciousness becomes one with his consciousness. Our being becomes one with his being. Jnana gives us liberation. Liberation means freedom from ignorance, freedom from the bondage of the body and the world. A liberated man becomes free from birth and death, free from all actions, free from all sorrows and evils of life. Liberation has a positive content. It is constitutive of eternal life, boundless joy, and infinite peace that passes understanding. As a mother gives rice and curry to one child, sago and arrowroot to another, and bread and butter to a third one, so the Lord has laid out for different men different paths suited to their natures, says Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna in his teachings. What an astonishingly accurate depiction of the spirit of the Bhagavad Gita. This grand scripture is like a proud mother who loves all her children intensely and equally, but cooks different dishes so that each child may get the nourishment that suits his digestive powers and biological requirements. The Gita is not a mere Hindu Shastra, but a universal gospel meant for men and women of all ages and of all climes. It offers a variety of spiritual insights and disciplines so that everyone at every level of evolution can get nourishment from it and evolve further. That's why the precipient commentator Sridhara Swami, the precipient commentator Sridhara Swami, in his introductory verse invokes, O Mother Bhagavad Gita, the effacer of worldliness. Ambatva manusandasami Bhagavad Gita bhavadveshini. Indeed, Gita is not just a section in the encyclopedic Mahabharata, but a holy chapter in the heroic history of human civilization itself. Its reach and range is staggering. It challenges the profound thinker, inspires the hero of action, nourishes the devotee, and fills the mind of the mystic with peace and ineffable. Its local may be Kurukshetra, but the epic battle it recounts is fought in the plane of every man's soul. No wonder it has revolutionized the very system of human thinking and provided the basis for all subsequent philosophic odysseys. It can meet the psychological requirements of mankind at every level and in every context. An orchestrated symphony of many a spiritual mood and mystic insight, it can, like Sri Krishna's flute, attract and hold entranced anyone who has the blessedness of listening to it. We are reminded of the blind men in Sri Ramakrishna's parable who went to see an elephant. Touching its different parts, they started describing the animal variously. One likened it to a pillar, another to a huge club, a third to a gigantic horse, a fourth to a winnowing basket, and yet another to an immense cauldron. It required a seeing passerby to explain to them that each of them was partially right and all totally wrong. What they experienced were but parts of the animal, which was all these and yet much more. The Gita, likewise, is too Catholic to be confined within the straitjacket of any particular philosophical doctrine. It has not come for the guidance of any particular section of humanity. The monk and the householder, the priest and the plebeian, men and women, scholar and ignoramus, the rich and the poor are all heirs to the nectar of the Gita. Arjunam nimitti kritya, says Shankara. The Lord is speaking to the Arjun in every one of us. And necessarily, what he presents is not a lone shortcut applicable only to Arjun, but a variety of highways for all aspirants to choose from and benefit. The Gita is a dynamo from which spiritual energy can be tapped at different voltages according to the need and capacity of the recipient. What the Lord does in the Gita is indeed a ticklish job. He has to speak in many voices, so to say. The result is that even Arjuna was bewildered. He said, Vyamishreneva vakyena buddhim mohyasi vame. O Lord, you are confusing me still further by your ambiguous statements. Tadekam vada nishchitya yena shrayoham apnuyam. Tell me the one sure method by which I can find fulfillment. But the divine diplomat skillfully avoids the trap. Arjuna may have a one-track mind, but not the Lord. After explaining the nature of Sankhya and Yoga, he quietly announces that both amount to the same. Then he merrily proceeds to discourse on mind control and devotion. He presents all the 4 yogas, Jnana, Karma, Bhakti and Dhyana. But finally, he leaves the choice to Arjuna. Yatechasi tatha kuru. But he makes it plain that though each path looks different, all lead to the same goal. The different radii start from different points in the circumference of the circle, but all of them converge at the same center. To the man at the center, all the radii are equally acceptable. The ideal state attained by following any of these paths is the same, though variously called as Chitaprajna, Jnani, Mahabhakta, Trigunatita, and so on. If we analyze the attributes of these different paragons, we shall see that there is no essential difference in their content. Sri Krishna always insists on a positive approach to the problem of life and reality. At the very outset, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Klaibhyam masmagama partha naitatva yupapadyate. Arjuna, don't become a victim to depression. It doesn't befit you. The hero of 100 battles. Your sorrow is thoroughly misplaced. Get up and do your duty. Tasmad uttishta kauntaya yuddhaya kritanishchayaha. Krishna asks Arjuna to become a yogi. Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. But the yoga he presents is a broad spectrum of discipline, not a monochromatic line. He makes it clear that he has no preferences. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam stataiva bhajamyaham. I shall respond to you at your own wavelength. Nor do I expect elaborate adoration. Patram pushpam palam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati. You can offer me anything as a token. A leaf, a flower, a fruit, or mere water. I do not assess devotion by the costliness of what is offered, but by the sincerity behind it. Sincerity. The Lord elaborates this point from another angle in the 12th chapter, where Lord Krishna conducts what looks like a Dutch auction. He asks Arjuna to fix his mind on him alone. Let your intellect rest in me, and you will live in me hereafter. Noting the diffidence on the face of his bosom friend, he gives an alternative. Well, if however you are not able to fix the mind steadily on me, then seek to attain me through the yoga of abhyas, or practice. Then in his infinite compassion, Lord Krishna goes further. If you are unable even to practice, you do all your work for my sake. And then comes the crowning advice. If you are unable to do even this, finally Lord Krishna says, take refuge in me and renounce the fruits of all actions. He gives the guarantee, Tyagat Shantaranantaram. As soon as the fruits of actions are given up, peace dawns immediately. So, Tyaga is preached as the ultimate and easiest method. We may recall Sri Ramakrishna's observation about the gist of the Gita. He says, repeat the word Gita 10 times quickly. The repetition produces the reverse chain, tagi, tagi, which indicates that Tyaga is the central behest of the Gita. The Charma Shloka of the Gita also bears out Sri Ramakrishna's conclusion. After detailing all the different paths, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Give up all the dharmas and take unconditional refuge in me. I shall absolve you of all sins. Don't grieve. The Lord started his discourse with the words Ashochya nanvashochastvam. You are sorrowing over beings who are not to be grieved about. The crux of the human predicament is sorrow, as the Buddha learnt it in another way. Buddha formulated a Bodhidharma to get rid of this sorrow. But Sri Krishna, who can never resist an opportunity to give a humorous turn to anything, advises what Buddha advised, but in words that appear to have the very contrary import. He calls for the total abandoning of all dharmas. Buddha said that each man has to be a light unto himself and work out his own salvation. But the Lord says, give up all your vanity about self-effort and give me the power of attorney. Yoga kshemam vahamyaham. I shall look after your welfare, secular and sacred. But a little reflection will show that the prapatti, that is total surrender, called for in the concluding lines of the Gita, is not a watering down of the ideal, but a lifting up of concepts to their highest level. What is it that we are asked to abandon? It is the notion of I and mine, from which alone all ideas of wrong, dharma and adharma arise. After that, what is left is only the Lord. It is as the Lord's instrument that the sadhaka functions henceforward. It is in this Atma Nivedana that all the 4 yogas find their consummation. The Jnani realizes that God is the only truth and that the ego is a deluding irrelevance. He becomes non-distinct from the divine. The Karma Yogi likewise gives up the idea of agentship and enjoyership and goes about his work as the Lord's instrument. Dhyana culminates in Nirvikalp Samadhi, the total dissolution of individuality. And in Bhakti Yoga, The devotee is concerned only with the happiness of the Lord and is totally indifferent to his own existence. Tat sukha sukhitvam. Thus all the four yogas reach their summit in Sharanagati. But we must not make a mistake about the nature of this self-surrender. Arjun at the beginning tells the Lord, Shadhimam tvam prapannam. I have taken refuge in you, please instruct me. And after listening to the Lord's discourse, he responds with the words, Karishye vachanam tava. I shall do as you bid me. Note that he no longer says, I am retiring from the world. On the contrary, he plunges into one of the toughest battles fought in the history with a fully balanced and completely prepared mind. The only difference between the pre-Gita Pandava hero and the post-Gita Arjun is that the Dhanurdhara realizes that his Gandiva is manipulated not by him but by the Yogeshwara, Lord Krishna. Shri Krishna said, Ma manusmara yudhyacha. Think of me and fight. And this is the message of the Gita in a nutshell to all persons and in all situations. Now, the ideal preached by the Gita is not utopian but eminently practical, whose birthday falls generally in the month of December, which is also the month of Gitopadesha. Gitopadesha was also done in the month of December. So, the Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, she was Gita in action. She was not reclusive, living in splendid isolation, far from the maddening crowds, ignoble strife. She lived in a veritable Kurukshetra in the back of the beyond village. As a head of a family consisting of members whose conduct would have tried the patience of a job. Nor was she rolling in affluence. She was the focus of all the trials and tribulations we usually associate with domestic life in a lower middle class family. But everyone who came to Sri Sharda Devi experienced only indescribable bliss. Like the Lord, she had no preferences. She accepted everyone and treated the Muslim dacoit Amjad with the same love and solicitude with which she treated Swami Shardananda, the great sannyasi secretary of the Ramakrishna order. She made no distinction between the secular and the spiritual. The profoundest spiritual truths flowed from her lips in a very casual way while attending to humdrum household chores. She could say without the least pride or self-consciousness that mukti was in the palm of her hand, and she could confer it on the deserving and the undeserving. Numerous are the instances in which her attendants remonstrated against her admitting a profligate to her presence. But she would dismiss the protests with the smiling remark that she could not say nay to anyone who called her mother. We are thrillingly reminded of the Bhagavad Gita verse, Apichetsu duracharo bhajate mam ananya bhag sadhureva samantavyah samyak vyavadito hi saha. Her compassion was not restricted even to the monks and householders who were the followers of Sri Ramakrishna. When someone objected to her purchasing Manchester mull for presentation to a relative in those days, when boycott of foreign cloth was at its peak, she could reply that the Manchester workers also were her children. What an astounding perspective in a Purda woman in an Orthodox village. The Holy Mother is the standing refutation to anyone who says that the Gita is circumscribed by the rigidity of Varnashrama Dharma. In every one of her words and deeds, the Holy Mother bore out the promise of the Lord, Yogakshemam Vahamyaham. She was a mother through and through, and therefore could not contemplate the sannyasin children of Sri Ramakrishna wandering over the land and living from hand to mouth. It was because of the deep felt prayer of the mother that the Ramakrishna Mutt came into being, providing a locus where the children of Sri Ramakrishna could all live under one roof and propagate the Master's message. She literally looked after the material and spiritual needs of all who came to her. And whenever one of her disciples was in trouble, she would tell him, remember, you have a mother. What a splendid echo of the Lord's clarion call, Ma Manusmara Yuddhacha. To be always conscious of the divine, to ever feel the divine presence, to live always in the awareness of the Supreme Being in the chambers of your heart and everywhere around you, is verily to live a life of fullness and divine perfection on earth itself. Such constant remembrance of God and such attitude of mind will release you forever from the clutches of Maya and free you from all fear. To forget the Supreme is to fall into Maya. To forget Him is to be assailed by fear. To live in unbroken remembrance of the Supreme Truth is to remain always in the region of light, far beyond Maya's reach. Mark carefully how the Gita again and again stresses upon this lofty message. The Lord declares, keep thou thy mind in me place thy reason. In other words, He says, at all times remember me and fight, you will surely attain me, thus having offered yourself. And yet again, Lord Krishna says, perform action, remaining united with me at heart. Salutations to Lord Krishna, the sweetest manifestation of the Supreme Being. Shri Krishna is regarded as the Purnavatar of God. He was perfect in every respect. God is all pervading. Shri Krishna's life on earth too was all comprehensive. Study Srimad Bhagavatam and the Mahabharata, you will understand what a multifaceted diamond Shri Krishna was. He was a wonderful child, divine boy, resplendent youth, dearest friend, mighty warrior, wise administrator, sweet comrade, and master of diplomacy, protector of the meek, death of the wicked, perseverer of dharma, clever strategist, humble servant, obedient pupil, dutiful son, loving husband, and supreme guru. What else you want? These and countless others are but aspects of His immanence as Krishna. Above all these, He is God, who in His own transcendental nature is the Lord of Lords, the Father and Mother of all creation, the very soul of all that exists. He is the substratum of all existence. He is the reality, immortal, eternal, infinite and absolute. He is not only immortal, but is immortality itself. It is therefore in the fitness of things that the scriptures that He propounded should partake of all these great virtues that characterized His divine manifestation and His transcendental nature. His gospel is so comprehensive that everyone can draw inspiration and guidance from it, whatever his social status may be, whatever his profession, and in whatever stage of spiritual evolution he may be. For in His gospel, the Lord has woven a beautiful and universal pattern of ethics that would appeal and apply to all. The grand edifice of the ethics of His gospel has been built on the eternal cornerstones: immortality of the soul, immanence of God, impermanence of the world, and the immediacy of liberation. Because these truths are universal, the ethics of his gospel also have universal application. Existing as it does as the very immortal principle in all beings, Lord Krishna proclaims with unimpeachable authority the immortality of the soul. Being manifest here in this world as the very life and soul of all beings, he reveals the immanence of God. Being the witness of the actions of Prakriti and the interplay of the gunas, and in the perfect knowledge of the nature of display of the gunas, he declares that the objects of the world are evanescent, that all that is born must die, and that all that is created must perish. Being the one who is conscious of the one imperishable, indivisible truth which is never affected by the illusory play of Prakriti, in which the individual jiva, which is essentially one with that Supreme Being, dreams that he is dumb-driven and bound, the Lord asserts that liberation is possible here and now through the thundering revelation of the immortality of the soul. Lord Krishna warns man not to deceive himself by trying to ignore the law of karma, the law of rebirth, and the law of retribution. The soul within him does not die with the death of the body, and so long as it does not liberate itself by attaining the jnana, it is bound to reap the harvest of the seeds it has sown in its several births. The jiva which imagines that it is a doer of an action is bound to it by an invisible thread called attachment. The action is a rubber ball with a long rubber band attached to it, which is given to the children to play with. One end of the band is tied to the finger of the child, and it throws the ball on the ground, and the ball promptly rebounds to the child's hand. Similarly, every action performed by you with the idea that you are doing it with a desire to attain a certain end is bound to rebound on you sooner or later, in this birth or in another. Death itself is but going from one room to another, and so long as the band of attachment is not broken by the knife of non-attachment, and the knot of desire born of ignorance is not loosened, the ball of action is bound to come back. One who realizes this will do no evil. It is ignorance of the immortality of the soul and the inevitable working of the law of action and reaction that makes the wicked man go his evil way. The wise man dismisses the misfortunes that may befall him as the working out of the evil karmas of the previous birth and is indifferent to them. And he is active in cultivating goodness and in doing good, convinced, in the words of Sri Krishna, that the doer of good never comes by evil, and that in the life to come he will not only be free from misery and misfortune, but will also get greater opportunities of progressing more rapidly towards the goal, that is, wisdom. The doctrine of the immortality of the soul is, therefore, the most important cornerstone in this gospel of Krishna. The next is the revelation of the immanence of God. God is not a cruel monarch or just a benevolent deity sitting on a golden throne in a faraway city depending for his knowledge of your actions on agents and spies. He is the indweller of everyone. He is the witness of your thoughts. People around you watch your actions and hear your words. God watches not only your actions but the motives that prompt them. He hears not only your words but also the whisper of your heart's intentions. It is therefore that Lord Jesus too said, "Thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly." The doctrine of the immanence of God exposes too the hypocrite who pretends to worship God in a shrine, ignoring the Lord walking bare-bodied on the road with a begging bowl in hand, who is writhing in pain, groaning under the under subjection and groping in the darkness of ignorance. The disguises assumed by him to test your sincerity and to give you a chance to worship him truly and to attain him here and now. Look up and see your Lord watching you through the eyes of everyone you meet. Have you got the sincerity to recognize him? Then you are fit to realize God and your own immortality. He is here, near you. And in order to bring this fact graphically before you, Sri Krishna describes himself as the several manifestations set forth in the Vibhuti Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita. The third, the doctrine of the impermanence of the world, is a stern warning against your setting too much store by the things of this world. The greatest treasure you acquire is but straw. The least that you do to the Lord immanent in all around you is the key to inexhaustible treasure. The things that you acquire are of this world, which will pass away. But by the service you render to God immanent here, you are watering the plant of immortality. Remember, the things that you possess and the whole world, not only this world which is but a mere speck of dust in this universe, but the universe itself, not only this, but countless universes that constitute creation, are but objects of a passing dream of the Supreme Being. Grabbing them is like catching hold of a cobra, mistaking it for a rope to tie round the waist as belt. Great is the misery of the one who takes the world as reality and runs after the pleasures of the world. Supreme bliss is the prize that awaits one who, understanding the evanescence of the world, applies himself to namasmaran, japa, kirtan, selfless service, renunciation, and meditation, in short, to the life divine. To such one, liberation is promised here and now. One who, through knowledge of the immortality of the soul, the immanence of God, and the impermanence of the world, casts off attachment to the world and the actions of Prakriti, attains liberation here and now. Not only that, the true devotee of the Lord attains him quite easily. This doctrine of the immediacy of liberation, this doctrine of hope, is a great incentive to the diligent student of the yoga of his gospel. True, Lord Krishna killed many asuras in a playful manner, even while he was a mere boy, and during his life on this earth had rid it of diabolical people. He took his birth here with that specific purpose, and he achieved it in a spectacular manner. But that was nothing compared to the transformation he has brought about in the heart of man. The greatest enemy of dharma he has always been in the heart of man. Dharma had to be rescued from the clutches of the demon of unrighteous heart. Not one who studies the Balalila of Lord Krishna would fail to be struck with wonder at the ingenuity displayed by this divine child in dealing with the asuras. He was very clever, original, and ingenious. Was he not God himself? Even in the case of restoration of dharma, it is very easy to deal with the rank materialist, the man of openly vicious nature, the human brute. His unrighteousness is patent, and it is easy to convince people of the need to keep away from him. Such vicious people are not as many as those who are extremely vicious at heart, whose conscience is enshrouded in ignorance, and through whose veins flows the deadly venom of selfishness, greed, lust, anger, and egotism, but who navishly presume an authority to teach people, to guide people along the path of righteousness. Often the devil quotes scriptures, and it is to the common man to detect the tiger masquerading in the garb of a cow before it is too late to save himself. It is by the rescue of dharma from the clutches of these misleaders of mankind that the Lord has truly fulfilled the self-imposed task of restoration of dharma. Mercilessly he exposes these hypocrites by defining jnana in terms of ethics. He has given a completely revolutionary definition of jnana: humility, unpretentiousness, non-injury, forgiveness, uprightness, service of the teacher, purity, steadfastness, self-control, indifference to the objects of the senses, absence of egoism, perception of or reflection over the evil in birth, death, old age, sickness and pain, non-attachment, non-identification of self with son, wife, home and the rest, constant even-mindedness on the attainment of the desirable and the undesirable, unswerving devotion unto me by the yoga of non-separation, resort to solitary places, distaste for the society of men, constancy in self-knowledge, perception of the end of true knowledge. This is declared to be knowledge, and what is opposite to it is ignorance. Repeatedly Lord Krishna extols righteousness. The greatest bhakta is not one who goes on simply rolling the beads with selfishness, lust, anger and greed enshrined in his heart, but one who is endowed with all auspicious qualities and who is devoted to the welfare of humanity. Lord Krishna doesn't define jnana as scriptural erudition or an intellectual appreciation of philosophic truths of the capacity and cleverness to string words together and to indulge in vain debating. It defines jnana as a sum total of the best of virtues. Read the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you will understand this clearly. The Lord says, watch for these qualities in a man. If they are present, he is a jnani, a saint. You can safely follow him and adopt him as your spiritual guide. If they are absent, avoid him, even though he may be an expert in the play of words and has learnt the whole of the Vedas and the Shastras by heart. For if you find that a tree is full of mango fruits, you need not dig up the earth to see if the tree has sprung up from the mango seed or from any other. Know him by the fruits. If the ignorance dwells in his heart, though the words appear to be words of wisdom, they are in fact the tentacles of the adharma, octopus, that dwells in the depths of his heart. How can a person pour out nectar from a jug that contains the deadliest poison? So, beware, all that glitters is not gold. Here is the touchstone of the true wisdom ethics. Here is the easiest way of distinguishing the real flower from the paper flower. Fragrance. Ethics is the fragrance of wisdom. So, Lord Krishna has given such profound teaching, the universal gospel in Bhagavad Gita. So if you are sincere and aspire for your spiritual life, please read Bhagavad Gita with utmost attention and try to practice what Lord Krishna has taught us. Thank you very much. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. May the Lord protect us, may He nourish us, may our knowledge be fruitful and enlightened, may we not hate each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.